Welcome to Payment Matters. I'm your host, Jeff Lynn. Thanks for tuning in. On this show, we talk about the ever-changing landscape of healthcare payments and the impacts to healthcare payers, providers, and consumers. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at #PaymentMatters and follow me at Jeff Belin. My guest for today's episode is Guillaume, Zwirek, the CEO of Well Health, a communication platform that connects patients to healthcare organizations via text, phone, email, and live chat. Thanks for joining me today, Guillaume. Just for the audience here, first time I'll be hearing from you. Can you just tell a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jeff. So I have a bit of a unique background, as you can tell by my name, and you pronounced it perfectly. I was actually born in Canada. So I'm French Canadian. I moved to the United States in the very early 90s, 92. And I grew up in the Silicon Valley when the Silicon Valley was just becoming, what we all know it as today. My dad was an engineer at Sun Microsystems. My mom was a physician in the area. Many of the children that I grew up with had parents who ran some of the big companies that we all know of today. And I think that formed a lot of my thinking as I grew up and ultimately where I wound up leading a healthcare company. I actually started my career in the consumer space. I started my career at Google in the late 2009 is when I started at Google. So I got to work on, initiatives that touch billions of people around the world. And that's kind of where I learned some of my first lessons, which is, what success looks like. I always tell people that you were hired or fired at Google based on, whether your product reached 1 billion people and they actually used it on a daily, in a daily fashion. And kind of fast forward to today in healthcare, a tremendously important industry where technology, I would say, is pretty nascent. I wound up in healthcare, just to take a step back, I wound up in healthcare because of a personal experience, like many of us do. I was running a marathon. I lost my vision. I wound up in the emergency room, and they told me I had to go see a cardiologist. And I was managing my own healthcare, and I became really, really frustrated by that experience. I loved my doctors. I loved the staff of the health system. I loved the facilities, but I could not stand all of the coordination behind the scenes that I had to manage. And that's kind of what led to the genesis of me wanting to form this company in Well.
It's interesting that you talk about all the coordination that needs to occur in healthcare. It's in many ways, you have a lot of core constituents and people out there. From your perspective, who is the real customer in healthcare, and whether that is happening today or should be happening, who do you view as the real customer in healthcare?
Well, for me, it's the patient. All that matters is outcomes and delivering those outcomes in a way that we're proud of. And when I say we, I mean we vendors like Instamed and myself, but also health systems all over the country. And the thing that's tricky about healthcare is that it is a much more complicated industry, and you can't really go direct to consumer the way you might be able to in traditional consumer tech, like working at a Google or a Facebook. You need to consider the needs of the provider. There are regulatory challenges, there are operational challenges. And I'll be honest, when I entered this industry, I was really naive to those challenges and to the considerations that it takes to build something that will actually be adopted by the staff who need and who manage driving great outcomes for patients. So again, I think to me, the answer is patience, but there's so much nuance because of healthcare and how complicated it is. I hated when people said that when I walked into the industry. They'd always tell me, you don't understand, Guy. And I do now, I think, 4 years later. So it is it's a complicated dilemma we have being in this industry.
I was at a talk recently, and one of the panelists on there who came from also a consumer to direct industry. They were saying they called joining healthcare was a 5-stage process, and he called the first stage despair. So when he realized how difficult it was, you highlighted the fact that when you came from Google and you came into healthcare, you learned a lot. You're really naive to think it was easy to solve. Any highlights there in terms of how difficult or how different healthcare was versus those other consumer direct industries you had experience in?
Yeah, we could probably spend a full hour talking about the nuances of healthcare. I can highlight on a couple of those themes that we've learned over our 4 years. Things like security. I think before you come into healthcare, you really don't understand the extent to which security is important, and it really, really is. As a vendor, it's very expensive to do, and it's hard to understand. And regulation is a moving target. And then there's regulation, and there's also what you as a company think is the right thing to do above and beyond the regulation. So security was a big part of it. The sales process as a whole, healthcare is tremendously, the organizations are tremendously complicated. It's hard to navigate. It feels like there are walls between different parts of the organization sometimes, and to sell a piece of software, you might have to engage 50 different people across the organization who have some sort of say. In terms of the product itself, the workflow is also tremendously complicated. There are so many solutions in this space. You have the EMR, you have all the different touch points with the patient, you have the back office team, the front office team, the care coordinators, the case managers, you have the insurance companies, and then there's the whole payment side of this. So it just, everything from the actual product design and the workflow considerations through to security and infrastructure and the actual sales process makes healthcare tremendously difficult. Direct to consumer, you can build something in 2 days, put it on the internet, put some ads behind it, put it on Reddit, and hopefully have 1,000 users a week later. Healthcare, that's an impossible proposition.
Yeah. I know we jumped ahead in here. Would love to understand a little bit more about WELL Health. And I think you touched briefly about your business, but love to understand what solutions and kind of what business problems you solve with WELL Health.
Yeah, so when I discovered healthcare, I mentioned that my mom was a physician. So I was close to healthcare my whole life. And I like to think that I had concierge care up until I turned 26 and was off of my my parents' insurance, because my mom was in my pocket and she could answer all my questions. And it really took the event of me being off of their insurance in a new city, managing healthcare on my own, to get the wake up call of how healthcare is for the normal person, what the status quo is for healthcare. And again, as I mentioned, our physicians are great. Our facilities tend to be fantastic. The people that choose to work in healthcare are genuinely good people who care about patients. And they're servants, right? And they are doing this because they believe it is so important for the world. But where I found my frustration is that in the process of hiring these great people and building these facilities and managing the regulatory components and all these other things that we talked about a second ago, the patient was kind of forgotten. There had been so much innovation in technology and communications and just managing processes, and that had not come to healthcare yet. So I literally found myself in a situation, and this is where it really came to a head for me, where I booked an appointment with a cardiologist, so a specialist. They weren't available for 3 months, and that was me pulling strings with my mother, who's a physician. And I went to see them, and I went to check in, and they asked me where my requisition was. I didn't know what a requisition was, period. And they explained to me that I had to get my primary care doctor effectively to write a piece of paper that gave me permission to get this, cardiology procedure done. So I had to go back and book an appointment, and this whole ordeal took over 6 months, right? And I had no idea that that's how the process worked. And their answer to me when I asked why they didn't tell me is they left me a voicemail. And I started noticing that throughout my care journey, there were so many of these experiences where it was, well, we told you, well, we sent you a letter. Well, you were supposed to download that app. We gave you the pamphlet about your diabetes. You didn't read that. And it was just so clear to me that I had to manage my own care. I had to manage spreadsheets, right, to keep myself on top of my healthcare. And that just made no sense to me. And to be honest, it makes no sense. The healthcare providers don't like it either. These health systems, they don't like the patient having to navigate this world on their own. They would love for there to be a better way. And that was the inspiration for WELL. I was looking at all of these solutions, all of these experiences that you get when you go see a healthcare physician, starting with scheduling and registration and eligibility, transportation maybe, that education material, the the prescription that you have to fill, the telemedicine visit, the billing, right? What you all do after the visit, and having to manage every single one of those on your own. And I thought to myself, man, it would be so much better if all of these systems I could talk to in one place. It would be so great if I could text Stanford and say, hey, I haven't received my bill yet, and I was just curious, I'm doing my year-end taxes, I'm curious, what I owe. And wouldn't it be amazing if somebody from the billing team responded to you within a couple minutes? And to me, in my head, again, this is the naivete, I thought that really isn't that hard. This has been done in other industries. This is just creating a common communications protocol that we could install at these organizations and then work with the vendors to route their communications through. So that was the inspiration. That's what we now do. So we're 4 years old, and we've built what we call a unified communications platform. So really what it is, it's a user interface, and it's used by typically administrative staff. So think call center, patient service reps, front office, back office. A lot of the system is automated, so administrators can go in and define their patient journey. I want to send a patient a reminder. I want to send them some instructions before their surgery. I want to send them a press gaining satisfaction form after their visit, and I want to send them their bill as soon as it's ready. And I want to send all that communications in a seamless, streamlined manner. So I'd say we're about 10% towards realizing the full vision here, but we've worked and partnered with folks like you to deliver a far more integrated experience for patients and staff.
Clearly, your company and the story behind the company really kind of addresses you highlighted the workflow, the security, the payment, all those things that you've had poor experiences with. One of the things that I'd love to kind of get your thoughts here is we've been hearing a lot of things about, great, if we build it and create these digital tools, will they come? and you look at these companies, large and small, from the largest health plans to the smallest providers here, they're rolling out a lot of digital tools. And one of the things that I'd love to kind of get your thoughts here is adoption. I think if we go to any conference here, there's probably 1,000 apps probably there in a conference space here. What do you think is there like a magic bullet here or something there to really kind of drive adoption of these digital tools? What's your kind of thoughts and recipe for success for that?
Yeah, so one thing I'll tell you is that I think healthcare as an industry has been thinking in silos when it comes to their investments instead of looking at the whole experience. So there's actually a debate here around best of breed versus jack of all trades. And I'm sure you've heard this, and many of your listeners have heard this in their conversations, either with health systems or with vendors. I believe that just because of how much is on the line with healthcare, we owe it to ourselves to buy best of breed. Right? If I can buy a system that can increase outcomes by X percent, and I'm buying best of breed, it's worth making that investment. But the problem is that in the process of buying best of breed, which is what a lot of health systems have done, they have forgotten to look at the whole experience. So let's talk about a couple companies that do this well outside of healthcare. I think Amazon is a great one, right? So you go back to the late 90s, early 2000s when e-commerce was really coming into play, and you had the internet flooded with tens of thousands of merchants who were trying to sell their goods. And that became a really daunting problem for folks like you and I who wanted to shop, but we didn't really have reliability. We didn't know where to find people. We had to manage everything ourselves. Amazon took a step back and said, hey, let's build an integrated experience. Let's get all these merchants. Let's get the best of breed. Let's get all the options in one place, and let's give consumers the reliability in terms of shipping. Let's give them the phenomenal customer service, and let's make it a no-brainer to shop online. Let's make it the easiest thing that anybody ever imagined. So I think Amazon did a really good job of this when you think about e-commerce. So when you think about engagement and adoption and the holy grail, for me, this is why we're in business, right? We think when you look at things holistically, you realize that the health systems need to regain control of the relationship. And the relationship, just quite simply, in our opinion, is the communications between you and the patient, the health system and the patient. We don't do anything else. All we do is make it as easy as possible for the health system to get a message to the patient in whatever modality makes the most sense for the patient. We don't care what the message is. every health system is nuanced and has their own needs. They may use, a leading billing tool like Instamed and want to deliver billing messages to their patients that way. And what we found is that when you think about this as a holistic experience and you unify communications, patients are far more likely to engage. We did a test with the patient portal. Patient portal is used a lot for lab results and clinical conversations. And we did a test with the health system where we sent the exact same text messages, same enrollment text message the patient portal was sending to the patient. And we processed that message through our unified platform, and enrollment went up 19%. Right? The difference, when you think about this as a patient, is now all the conversations are happening in one place. So I hate to bring this back to our product, but really for us, it's the holy grail. We think the solution to engagement is thinking about the big picture and owning communications and investing in the platform and the technology to streamline communications across the board.
Got it. That's a great comment. Just real quick, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Payment Matters. I'm joined by Guillaume Zwirek of Well Health. So, as I kind of look at this and think through the communication barriers, and we've seen this over and over, tied to a lot of it's being paper. A lot of it's being done by phone here. And especially with your experiences in the tech industries, especially with Google and so on, how they've taken that into more of a digital engagement type of platform here. As you look at this and, what do you think, I call it part of this is in healthcare, a lot of people that have been here for a while, there's an echo chamber and there's entrenchment in terms of how to do things. If you had to call it a magic wand here, what do you think should occur to really kind of reduce the friction of healthcare, that there's more collaboration, better workflow, and so on? What would you like to see and to reduce the friction, to reduce the complexity that you had personally?
I think there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance between the payers, the health systems, and the vendors. And I think it makes it challenging to navigate healthcare. It makes it challenging to have what feels like a fully integrated experience. I was at a payer summit a couple weeks ago for one of the big payers, and it was interesting to hear them talk about how they think about themselves. And they're also thinking about their members, right, which are our patients as health systems. They're thinking about their members as their responsibility. But when I think about myself as a consumer of healthcare, we all are consumers of healthcare. I really see myself as buying, services from a provider. And for me, that's really my primary care provider. My PCP is my Sherpa in my healthcare journey. So sadly, I don't have the answer here, but I always like thinking about the problems in the eyes of the customer, which I do think is the patient. And the good news is we're all patients. So it should be pretty easy for us to put ourselves in those shoes and think about what we would want to see. And obviously, we would want it to be more integrated. The question is, how do you actually deploy that? That is the hard stuff. And I think you mentioned a really good point that triggered a memory for me, Jeff, which is this thought of entrenchment. And I really like the word complacency. Well, I don't like it. I think it's a bad thing, but I've recently been thinking a lot about complacency. And one of the things I ask all my executives almost once a month is, what would you be doing if this was your first day at Well? Let's just take a step back, forget everything. What would your first day look like? When you look at our business, what are we doing wrong? Where are we being complacent? And we just had this experience last week where my CTO and I sat down and we had a problem with a carrier that was filtering a minority of messages, a tiny, insignificant amount when you've been in healthcare for a long time and you're building out that complacency. And we asked ourselves that question, and we realized it isn't acceptable for one message not to go out. And if I was coming straight from Google, I would be very, very concerned about this, and I'd be raising tons of red flags. And I would encourage other healthcare leaders, whether you're at a vendor or at a health system or with a payer, to continually put yourself in the patient's shoes and ask yourself, if I was new to healthcare for the very first time, what would I change? What is really important?
That's a tough question, because I feel like you go to different parts of the country, people may want different things, right? But I hear you. If the center is the consumer and their world probably centers around the provider, and that's where I call that interaction is holy between those two.
And
do you think
there's a
yeah?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't know if you see this, but to me, it almost seems like there's a fight that's about to brew between the employers, the payers, the health systems, and the vendors, and everybody wanting to own the patient and the relationship with the patient. It's almost like this final Game of Thrones, that episode that we're going into, right? Everybody kind of wants to own the patient. My philosophy is that really it should be the PCP, and we're here to enable health systems, be invisible, and just help them deliver a more integrated experience. Have you seen this as you look at the market as well, kind of this coming to a head of these 4 different players in healthcare?
No, absolutely. I kind of equate that to the one, you go to any conference, there's probably 1,000 consumer apps that label everything as a patient engagement app opportunity. So, drill down the hardware.
That's dangerous.
Right? So with my app, I'll be able to drive engagement, right? So that's it's a concern here, and I think there's a movement, and I think everyone sees it. When I say everyone, I'm not just talking about the providers and the health systems, the employers, the health plans. Everyone sees how important and critical the consumer is. But I think that at the end of the day drives this healthcare economy from our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm kind of thinking about what you said before, which is how when the dawn of kind of e-commerce, when there's thousands of sites out there to buy stuff, and then you Amazon and eBay and those companies started aggregating all of them together to really kind of unify the payment experience for all those people. Do you think that type of unification could occur in healthcare?
I do. And I think it's going to happen on a couple of different levels. I think it's going to happen on the customer experience side. I think it'll happen on the payment side, which you all fit really nicely in. I think it has to happen with kind of the supply chain of healthcare, right? Starting with the payer and going all the way down to the provider and the employer, somewhere there in between. But to me, the no-brainers that are coming up right now that health systems can invest in right now is horizontal integration on the customer experience side, which is communications, and in payments. Right.
Yeah, and that's it'd be great for everything to be integrated end to end. I'll interested in your thoughts here as we're starting to see all these large companies, the Googles, the Amazon, especially with the announcement with JP Morgan Chase and Berkshire Hathaway here, all trying to get into healthcare. and you're hearing more and more about machine learning AI being deployed in healthcare. What's your sense of kind of those tools being able to help in any of the consumer experiences that are out there?
So I'm really excited to see what these call them employer joint ventures do. I'm excited because they're new to healthcare, at least the drivers of these kind of JVs are new to healthcare, and they have tremendous leverage because they can be more integrated, because they can own the payer side, and they can own the patient experience side, and they can own the delivery to those patients as well. Now, I do think this is threatening to a lot of people in this space, but if we're on the space for the right reasons, which is just delivering a better healthcare, I think that there's a lot of promise in what these technology companies could do for healthcare. Now, I think they're going to hit the same barriers that you and I have, which is all the nuances of healthcare, the security, the workflow, everything that we've learned in building companies. When it comes to AI, machine learning, kind of the new tech that we're seeing pioneered by these kind of next stage tech companies, I just don't think, when it comes to what we do and what you do, that stuff is nowhere close to passing the Turing test. Companies that say they have bots, and smart assistants, most of them are really just glorified decision trees with kind of yes/no workflows, which is not true, automation. It's not true artificial intelligence. I believe that as an industry, we have health systems with phenomenal people, and we should focus on leveraging the people that we have, and we shouldn't sacrifice patient experience for efficiency. And we should focus first on improving the experience with the resources we have, and then work towards efficiency. So I do think that the investments should be made in the right steps. And I really do think, we shouldn't be talking about cutting staff before we've even fixed some of the challenges we have around patient experience today, which are very real.
And if you were to diagnose the patient experience today within the healthcare ecosystem, like if you were the doctor for the experience, what do you think are the three biggest ailments impacting the consumer experience?
Oh, I like this analogy. I never went to med school, so any physicians listening in are going to have to forgive the way I frame my answer. So I'll speak to myself personally. As a patient, I think I lack awareness in the drivers that'll help me be healthy, and awareness in the things that I need to do to have the best possible outcomes. So I think awareness would be the first one. The second is that I think that the experience is very uncoordinated. So we end up spending a lot of time repeating things with patients and guiding them through their care, and frankly, losing sight of where they are in their care because the experience is uncoordinated. And then I guess the third thing I'd say is, it's kind of a shame because there's a huge industry here with a lot of money being spent, a lot of vulnerable people, and if we can fix this, it's going to be really, really good. It's going to be good for people. It's going to be good for patients. It's going to be good for business people. It's going to be good for the world. So I know that's not a diagnosis, but that would be my potential remediation. If we fix those first two things, maybe we can, there's a big opportunity to make a big, big difference. And that's what gets me excited and wakes me up every day. It's that opportunity.
That's a great answer. No, thank you for joining us today. Those are the payment matters we're tackling today, and thank you to my guest Guillaume for joining me today. Guillaume, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and Well Health?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Guillaume Zwirek, Guillau, M as in Michael, E, and it'll probably be in the speaking notes of the podcast as well. And our website is Well, W-E-L-L, Well as in wellness, app as an application, wellapp.com.
Well, thank you once again, and thank you to all the listeners listening in. Remember that you can listen in to this episode weekdays at 4:30 a.m., 12:30 p.m., and 8:30 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or just say, Alexa, play HealthcareNOW Radio. If you have a comment about the episode of the show, follow #PaymentMatters or connect with me on Twitter at Jeff B. Lynn. You can learn more about the show at HealthcareNOWRadio.com or at Instamed.com. And until next time, I'm Jeff Lynn.